If your tomato plants are covered in flowers, but you're still not seeing tomatoes, you're probably wondering what in the world is going on. The flowers are there, the plant looks healthy, you keep checking for little tomatoes to start forming, and they never do. And that is really frustrating. I'm going to show you the 3 critical problems that stop tomato flowers from turning into tomatoes, including one that can make your plant look bigger and healthier than ever, while producing almost no tomatoes. Let's jump in. Now let's start with the easiest one to identify, because if this is the problem, the flowers usually leave a pretty clear clue behind. If your flowers look completely normal, stay on the plant for several days, and then simply dry up and disappear without ever forming a tiny green tomato behind the bloom. Poor pollination is usually the first thing I would suspect. Now, if you're standing out here in your garden wondering, yep, that's exactly what's happening to mine, come in close for a second, because this is what I look for first. Let's take a look at this flower right here. Right behind the bloom, you should start to see a tiny little baby tomato swelling. That's the baby tomato beginning to form. If that swelling never appears and the flower dries up, falls off, and a flower you thought was going to become a tomato just disappears, and you're checking the plant every day, expecting to see more flowers, getting excited, and then nothing. No baby tomato, no harvest, just another flower that disappeared. That's the clue. Now you might be thinking, Kim, but I've got bees all over my garden. And bees absolutely do help with tomato pollination. However, when bees land on tomato flowers, they can help shake the pollen loose and improve pollination. But the difference is that tomatoes don't rely on bees the same way cucumbers, squash, and melons do. Everything needed to make a tomato is already inside a single flower, as opposed to cucumbers and squash, which have both male and female flowers. Now with tomatoes, the pollen just needs enough movement to get to where it needs to go, to move around inside the flower. Wind can do it, bees can do it, but sometimes there just isn't enough pollen movement for a successful fruit set. That's why you can have bees visiting your flowers and still end up with blooms that never become tomatoes. The flower can look perfectly fine, but the critical thing is what happens next. Do you see that little baby tomato start forming behind the flower? Or does that flower dry up and fall off? That's what tells me whether pollination happened or not. Now, the good news is this is usually one of the easiest problems to fix. In the morning, gently tap the flower clusters with your finger, or give the cage or your tomato string a little shake as you walk by. Now, I call this the tomato tickle. Yep, I said it, tomato tickle. I know it sounds silly, but sometimes your tomatoes just need a little bit of help moving that pollen around inside the flower. Mother Nature usually handles it with wind and movement, and we're just giving her a little backup. Then come back in a few days and check those same flowers again. You might need to give them another little tomato tickle. What you want to see is that tiny little swelling starting to form right behind the bloom. Once you start seeing those baby tomatoes forming, you'll know you've solved this problem and those flowers are finally on their way to becoming tomatoes. What if you were getting tomatoes, then all of a sudden the flowers keep coming, but the tomatoes stop? Now this one usually starts showing up when the summer heat really kicks in. This is where the next problem comes in. And this one can wipe out a whole lot of future tomatoes in a hurry. Now once temperatures start pushing into the 90s, and especially when you're getting stretches into the upper 90s or triple digits, you know that summer heat's coming. Tomato flowers often starts dropping instead of turning into tomatoes. These are the tomatoes you were already counting on harvesting a few weeks from now, and it's so disappointing when you see that happen. Now for some of you, especially if you've had a really cool spring, or if you've had temperatures swinging between hot and cloudy and cool, like we have here in Southern California, we've got this June gloom going on, that can really slow fruit set down. That's exactly what's happening in my garden this year, and fruit set has been very slow. Usually there's not much fix there. You just have to give the plants a little more time and the weather a little more time to warm up. Here's what you're going to see during hot weather. The flowers open, they look perfectly normal, and you think, finally, I've got tomatoes coming. Then a few days later, they dry up and drop off, and it's so, so disappointing. Every one of these flowers has the potential to become a tiny tomato. So when flowers start dropping, you're not just losing flowers, you're actually also losing future tomatoes. So when those temperatures stay at high day after day, your tomato plant just kicks into survival mode. And you know what? I don't blame it at all. When it's 102 degrees outside, I'm looking for shade, something cold to drink, and I'm definitely not looking to do a bunch of work in the garden when it's that hot. And your tomato plant is doing exactly the same thing. Instead of putting energy into making tomatoes, it's just trying to make it through the heat. And that's exactly why I throw a shade cloth over my tomatoes during extreme hot spells. If I've got a forecast showing 5 days in the 90s or higher, that's when I break out the shade cloth. For one hot afternoon, a few hours and higher temperatures, I usually don't worry too much about it. However, it's those extended hot stretches that start drying up flowers before they ever become tomatoes. Now, you don't need to build some huge fancy structure over your raised bed. Just keep it simple. All I do is clip the shade cloth right to my trellis or throw it over one of my tomato cages. And let me show you something that made me actually do a double take the first time I measured it. Under my shade cloth, temperatures can actually stay 10 to 15 degrees cooler than they are in the direct sun. Now, this is a huge difference. If it's 95 degrees outside and I can bring that temperature down to 80 or 85 degrees under the shade cloth, these flowers have a much better chance of turning into tomatoes instead of dropping off. Instead of losing those flowers and waiting for the plant to start all over again, you'll keep more tomatoes coming and avoid losing weeks waiting for new flowers and new tomatoes to show up. Now, once temperatures are consistently back under the mid-80s, I take the shade cloth off and let the tomatoes be in the full sun. Now, mulch is the other huge heat stress fix. Bare soil heats up fast, which means hotter roots and more stress on the plant. Now, what I use is clean shredded straw or shredded leaves around my tomatoes, a few inches deep, even deeper in extended heat waves. Now, what this does is it helps keep the root zone cooler, helps the soil hold moisture longer, and helps the plant keep producing tomatoes instead of just trying to survive the heat. So do these two things, shade cloth and mulch, and you'll keep a lot more of these flowers turning into tomatoes, keeping your harvest coming in, and save yourself weeks of waiting for the plant to recover after a heat wave. If you're looking for what to plant next to keep those harvests coming in through the summer, check out my new Power Producer Seed Bundle. I put it together with some of my favorite fast-growing summer crops. And right now it's 50% off with code POWER50 at CaliKimGardenandHome.com. Thanks. Remember at the beginning when I said one of these problems can make your tomato plant look bigger and healthier than ever while producing very few tomatoes? This is the one I was talking about. Have you ever had one of those tomato plants that just won't stop growing? It's growing over the top of the cage, taking over half the garden bed, dark green, healthy looking, and still putting out tons of new growth. You may even have flowers, and at first glance, everything looks great. You know what I mean? You're looking at that plant thinking, this plant is amazing. Then you look a little bit closer, and for all that growth, there just aren't that many tomatoes. All leaves. No tomatoes. One of the most common reasons is too much nitrogen. Nitrogen is what drives all that leafy green growth. And when there's too much of it, the plant keeps putting energy into growing bigger instead of putting that energy into tomatoes. So at this point, the plant doesn't need help getting bigger, it needs help making tomatoes. So what do? If your tomato plant is already huge and dark green, growing like crazy and barely producing tomatoes like I'm talking about, stop fertilizing it for a couple of weeks. Then watch those flowers and see if more of them start turning into tomatoes. More flowers turning into tomatoes means more tomatoes on the plant and a lot more tomatoes in your harvest basket. So if you've got a giant tomato plant, a few flowers, and only a handful of tomatoes to show for all that growth, don't assume you're doing something wrong. The plant's already doing the growing. So just back off on the fertilizer and you should see more flowers and tomatoes on your plant in just a few weeks. The good news is none of these problems mean your season is over. Most of the time, it's just a matter of figuring out what's getting in the way and making these few simple fixes. And then one day, you'll walk out to the garden and notice things are finally headed in the right direction. The flowers that used to drop off are turning into tomatoes. More tomatoes are showing up on your plants. And before long, you're picking those delicious tomatoes. Homegrown tomatoes are amazing. For sandwiches, salads, and all those summer recipes you've been looking so much forward to. I'd love to hear what's going on with your tomatoes this season. Which one of these problems are you dealing with? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the garden.